Welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast. Are you over 40 and ready to truly thrive? Well, on this podcast, we go deep on ways to thrive across the 5 pillars of midlife: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I'm Bernie Borges, midlife advocate, life coach, and your host. Subscribe now and get ready to thrive. Tom, welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast, a vulnerable conversations episode.
Bernie, I am thrilled to be here and share my experience.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you, and can't wait to dive into your experience. So a little bit of context for the listener. You and I met, we were talking off camera, so to speak, I think about 15 years ago at a conference. And you and I have been in the podcasting space. I've been in it for about 11 years, so you probably outdate me a little bit in the podcasting space. So you are a professional with tons and tons of experience, your own podcast. You run a business around helping podcasters get interviews for podcasts. However, what I invited you to join me and discuss today is a recent experience that you had that I can't wait to hear about, because even before we started recording, I even had to kind of ask you to slow down because I wanted to hear it in the recording. You said you had a life-changing experience. I'm not going to give any more detail. I'd invite you to give that detail. Tell us about that life-changing experience, and we'll have some conversation around it.
Yeah, and it's how to frame it. And now it was a month ago, so I've had some time to think about it. But I had to ask myself, when was the last time I had a month off work? I think it was probably when I was about 12 years old, mowing lawns, right, and shoveling driveways. When was I that I took a month just to focus on myself and my wife and my relationship and my health? And we did this in the month of September. My bride, my wife, I call her my bride, we hiked the Camino de Santiago. So we started in the Pyrenees Mountains of France, and we walked over 500 miles in 26 days with everything we needed on our back. And people are like, that's amazing. And it's like, no, it's just one step after another. Really, what's amazing is that I didn't do it before this. And I want to go back and do it again, because I'm sure I'll learn even more lessons.
Well, Tom, the first question that I want to ask you is, why? Why did you and your wife do it?
We watched a movie about a decade ago called The Way, and it was a movie about the Camino, and we watched that and like, that would be great to do someday, right? And then during COVID, we started to walk a lot because there wasn't a lot else to do. We live out in the country, and that used to be our time to talk with each other, right? We're both busy, we've got lives, and but we would go for a walk, and we'd walk to the restaurant. We'd walk to breakfast, and we live in the country. So we'd walk for a beer, right? The closest brewery is 3 miles away. So that's a 6-mile walk. You don't have to worry if you have more than one, right? So we got to enjoy really walking because there was no cell phones. There was no distractions, and life seemed to slow down during that. And we also realized it was good for our health. So it was one of these things. And then finally, the forcing function is I had already talked about this, right? I'm going to do this someday, and we're going to do it in September. Well, my number 2, my chief operating officer, took maternity leave in February, and she came back from maternity leave, and she said, if I can take time off for the baby, you can take time off for the Camino. And so we worked together to get me to that point. And I'm so glad I did, because I came back a new person, a person that I like a whole lot more too.
Okay. Well, I certainly want to get into that. But I want to ask you, you said that it took you 26 days. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Is that what you anticipated? Did you kind of map it out in advance and plan that it would be a 26-day adventure?
Yes and no, right? You plan it, but we figured we'd do it somewhere between 30 and 35 days. Right now, we got some great weather there, but we would just keep walking, right? If we still felt good, we'd walk a little bit more. And it's such a great trail. It's been there since the Middle Ages. It goes through small communities. It goes through big towns. There's hotels. There's hostels. There's what they call albergues, which is like college boarding house, if you remember those. And so there was always places to stop. And there's a phrase called the Camino provides. And so we never wanted for anything, right? If we were tired, we found a place.
So I would imagine that along the way, you had some encounters with other people and just encounters. I mean, what are some of the, I would imagine you had many. What are some of the memorable, many or meaningful encounters that you had during those 29 days?
That was the most powerful things was the people. The scenery was great. The food was great, but the conversations with the people. And I remember hearing that all these different saints throughout the ages had walked the Camino. And I remember talking to my mom from the Camino, and she pointed out that the phone reception there was better than it was in Western Michigan. And I said, all these saints have walked it. And she's like, did you run into any saints? And I said, no, but I've run into some angels. And you never knew who you're going to run into. The vast majority of the people there for the 500-mile hike were people that had recently retired, right? They had this opportunity. They still had their health, and the couples would go and walk it. And so we'd meet people that had just recently retired and were in a similar stage of life from Karen and I, right? Empty nesters. And you never knew who you were going to run into. And you'd walk along in the trail and maybe you'd see him again, maybe you wouldn't. I was energized by the older people and the younger people that I had met. So we met two great people. It was Scott and Carol from St. Louis, and Bernie. I had a hard time keeping up with them. We walked with them for an entire day, and he was 70 and she was 68. And they were telling me all of the different places that they'd hiked and different things. He told me what the decade of his 60s looked like. And I was asking him, what he learned from that. And it was almost like this angel or a mentor that came into my life. And same way with Karen, right? She was talking to this woman about what did that next decade look like for her. So that was like at one extreme. And then the other extreme was there was college students there. And some of them, I can think of one group that was doing a study abroad. And here are kids that were 19, 20, I don't know, maybe 21. And they're walking along and talk to them and thinking, wow, what would my life had looked like if I had this experience when I was their age? And hearing about their dreams and their passions and their excitement, that just energized me. I can't say that I met a rude person in Europe, right? They always talk about the French being rude. We flew in and out of Paris. The first rude person I met was when I came back and had to deal with the TSA. So it was just angels along the way.
Wow, that is fascinating. So, what about the trail itself? How crowded is it? I mean, are you walking among a lot of people, or is it distributed and sparse, or all the above?
It varies, right? There are certain times where you're walking and you don't see anybody for hours, right? There's a place called the Meseta. Think of South Dakota, and that's what it looked like. Just wheat fields and hay fields forever. There were other areas where there were lots of people, right? You'd go through towns like Pamplona was my favorite town in Spain. And people realized you were a pilgrim, but you were walking through a town with lots and lots of other people. And how do you know that somebody was a pilgrim? Well, they look like a foreigner with everything they own in a backpack. They get lost and there's a little shell on the backpack. But some of it was like very little of it was walking through alongside a road. Most of it was paths, some uphill, some downhill, walking through forest, right? We walked through one forest and it was magical. There were horses in there. Like somebody just let out probably 24 horses and they were just grazing in this forest. And so each day you didn't know what you were going to see. And that was sort of the magical part of it. because I've been on this earth for 59 years. And after a while, everything looks about the same, right? I know what Southwest Michigan looks like. Today is going to be similar to yesterday. And there, you weren't quite sure. And that excitement, that stretching of your brain is something that I hadn't experienced in a long time. At times, I felt like one of my grandchildren, right? Just so excited for a new experience.
Okay, so Tom, let's talk about impact because you said at the beginning of this conversation you're a different person. You like this version of you better. When did you begin to even know that you were having an impact? Was it while you were there? When you return? Comment on that.
My wife calls it Camino Tom, right? And she's like, I love Camino Tom. I hope he sticks around forever. I think it was probably, honestly, probably about 2 weeks in, right? It took me that long to let go and de-stress, right? I'm an alpha type person. I control everything and want to plan everything, and just realizing I didn't need to do that. Another thing was the creativity that comes back. We have a client in our business, and she is a executive coach, and she tells the story. She was an MD, a PhD, and she said once she got out of medicine, it took her a couple of months to have a creative idea because she was so stressed. And all of a sudden, I actually talked with her when I was on the trail. And I think it was about 2 weeks in, and I started to have dreams like I hadn't since I was a kid, right? Um, and they weren't the stress dreams that I would normally have. They were just creative dreams and happy dreams. And so I think that lack of stress, and I think the exercise and the fresh air helped a lot too. So I started to realize something is changing here. The things that used to stress me out or I'd worry about didn't worry me as much, right? I had internet there on my phone, and my team knew that if they really needed something, they could always reach out. I would check things, and things that would get me stressed in the past. I just looked at it and said, I'm in good hands, right? They'll take care of it. And just realizing that I didn't have to control the entire world. Before that, I felt like I had to control the entire world. And now one of the things that I look at it is I don't. And another thing that I learned on the Camino was that there's no bad news, right? No matter what happened on there, something good came out of it. Like before that couple that I mentioned that I met from St. Louis, I had forgotten my hat in one of the churches, right? I had this St. Louis Blues hat on. I grabbed it as we were going out of the house because I needed a hat. And, respectful, when I go into church, I take my hat off, and I dropped it. And I didn't realize it till about a half mile later. And I'm like, don't worry about it. And Karen's like, no, let's go back and get it. We walked back and got it. And as we walked out and I was putting my hat on, they said, are you from St. Louis? I'm like, no. And that started the conversation. So it's like, no matter what bad thing happens, something good's going to come out of it. And I've
Mhm.
talked about that. I'm on my second marriage. And while as painful as that was, the first divorce and everything, something good came out of that. And so now that's how I frame Camino Tom looks at it, right? All right. It seems like a problem, but what is this going to make possible?
So I would imagine that as you were before the trip, as you were anticipating the trip, you were anticipating that it was going to be a memorable experience, that there's going to be something really meaningful happen for you and perhaps for your relationship with your wife. So, what I want to know, Tom, is the reality what you expected, or is it different in terms of the impact that it had on you?
I'll be honest. Before we left, I expected it would get canceled, right? Something is going to come up in our world, right? Either with business, with family, geopolitical. It's like, oh, we're not going to be able to go. So when we got there, I was like, wow, this is really going to happen. And I tried to keep an open mind on it. Karen and I met running marathons many years ago. And one of the things that I noticed there when I was running marathons is right around mile 22, I'd get some understanding or some new thought would come in my mind that was so powerful. And I think, God tries speaking to me in life, but I'm too busy to listen. So sometimes I just got to get tired through 22 miles of running before I start listening. And so I thought that entire thing, something's going to come to me. And I can't say a few things, but it wasn't like a stroke of lightning or anything. But there was different things that came to me that I saw, and I just tried to be open to them. And not stress it too much of like, oh, I've got to figure this out. When people would say, why are you going there? I would jokingly say, and I think I said this to you before I left, that I'm going there to figure out what I want to do with the second half of my life, right? I'm 59. I hope this is the midway point, but you know, regardless, I was just trying to figure out what the future is going to look like, and I found that.
You did. Okay. So keep going. What did you discover about the second half of your life?
I met a lot of people that I admired there, right? And I would say the difference is they were elders, not elderly, right? Some people get to a certain point and no judgment or anything like that, but they sit down, they put their feet up, and they become those elderly people. The people that I met were the elders, right? They were excited. They were sharing their wisdom. They were sharing their lessons. They wanted to be there with other people, and that was so inspiring. And that kept them youthful. And I'm like, that's who I want to be. I want to be an elder, not elderly. There's something else that struck me. This is probably like one of those lightning moments. On the Spanish flag, there's two words, and it's plus ultra, right? And you say it in Latin. I probably butchered it, but with ChatGPT now, you can translate anything. If you got a question on the Camino, just ask ChatGPT. It'll tell you. So I asked it, what does plus ultra mean? And it gave me this entire thing that during the Roman times, there was something written at the Straits of Gibraltar, and it was something like non-ultra or something like that, where it meant nothing is beyond this point, right? It's sort of like in the maps where they say there be dragons. And Spain, when they started to do the conquests, the explorations, all the rest of that, the world went from there is nothing beyond this to plus ultra means basically more beyond. And they said, no, there's a whole nother world for that. And that struck me like, I even now I get shivers when I start thinking about how I read that on ChatGPT. And it's sort of, I looked at life and it's like, okay, so once you hit a certain age, there's nothing beyond that, right? All the best is behind you. Nothing beyond this. And that's not the way you look at life, right? They proved what's more, what's beyond this. And so this is why I'm sort of looking at it. It's like, what's beyond this, right? What's beyond this world that I've lived in already? And it's exciting to me.
And you said earlier that the new Tom, as your wife calls it, the Camino Tom, you like better than the old Tom. So if I was to ask you to how to, frame that up, well, describe the new Tom.
Yeah. And before I left, I was burnt out, right? At work. I remember the days where I'd get up early, I'd work late, and the days went so fast. And I find that I didn't run out of time in a day. I'd run out of energy, right? I drag myself downstairs to the office. I work in my home, and I wanted to put a face on for my team of 22, but I felt like I was probably working at about 60%, right? Even if I put the time in, everything, when a problem came up, I viewed it as a problem, right? And I'd clock out at 4. I was going to say 5. Let's be honest. It's probably 4. And I was like, I'm beat, right? I don't have time to go. I don't have the energy to go for a walk and do other things. And I was burnt out. And going on the Camino, it was like, is it time to retire? Is it time to sell the business? I didn't want to do that. And so I came back re-energized, right? Now I'm waking up at 4:30 thinking, I'm excited. I want to get to this stuff, right? And now, granted, I've been back 2 weeks, but I've had 5 a.m. calls. And when people are like, you'll do that? And this is for like people that are in Europe or Australia, our clients. I'm like, yeah, I'm up having coffee at that time anyway. And now Karen's, coming in at, 5:30 at night. And she's like, when are you going to be ready for dinner? And I'm like, it's only 2 p.m. And I look down and it's like the time is just going faster there. And the team has recognized it too. They like, you're happier, you feel less stressed out. And I don't know if this will last forever, but I tell you what, Bernie, when it starts to leave, I'm not going to push through it and work through it, right? I'm going to figure out what can I do to reset that. Maybe it's not another 30 days away, but maybe it's a long weekend. Maybe it's just a good walk someday. There is, forget medicine and pills. There is nothing in my mind that a good walk can't solve. Right.
Right. Right. So you've shared how you've changed, like the new Tom, in terms of how you're approaching your work, your business. Tom, this is a vulnerable conversations episode. So I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, what impact has it had on your marriage?
We were always very, very tight, right? Karen and I, we work together. We spend a lot of time together, but it drew us even closer together, and it gave us time to talk, gave us time to dream. It gave us time to think about what this next version of our life looks like. And Bernie, I got to tell you, I fell in love with Spain. The only thing that really brought me back was family, right? Because we've got 2 little grandkids and we miss them so much, and they missed us. And so coming back, that is so much more special. And it's sort of like when they're always here, your family's always here. You don't appreciate them as much. And so I think it gave me new appreciation for family too.
If I can take you back to the actual Camino adventure, there's a beginning and there's an end. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So when you said that on average it takes, call it 30 days, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
So have you had this kind of conversation with anybody outside of this podcast, of course, where you mentioned that you did this and you start to kind of sell the idea of like, you should consider doing it, and here's why? Have you had those conversations where you're kind of like encouraging others to do it?
I am, and you don't have to do the entire thing, right? There's certain people that go for a week and just do the last 100 kilometers, right? So 60 miles, break it down into 10 miles a day or something. So it's more manageable. You don't have to do the entire thing. I'm a member of an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization, and the thing that I've learned from that more than anything is that nobody wants to be told what to do, right? No business owner, no adult, and even my grandkids, right? You're not the boss of me. Don't tell me what to do. So I'm trying not to tell people, oh, you should do this. You need to do this. I just try to share my experience and have them ask questions and answer it and let them connect the dots. Because if you send somebody there as a homework assignment to do, if you don't want to be there, it's going to be hell, right? But if you want to be there, it's going to be magical. So I just look at it. Maybe it's not for everybody, but this is what I got out of it. So I'm trying to share my experience when people ask for it.
Okay. Fair. And I think it's a great approach, Tom. To your point, nobody likes to be told what to do, and it's not for everybody. It's somebody that just may not want to do it, no matter what a great experience you had. So I like your
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody came up to me and they're like, wow, you lost a lot of weight. You know, what'd you do? And, you know, I would have lost a lot more weight. I lost 12 pounds in a month. And if I wouldn't have been drinking so much cerveza and drinking so much vino, I probably would have lost 20. But that was sort of my lead in to say, oh, I did this. And they started asking
right,
and going, man, that makes so much more sense than a crash diet. So if you want to do
right.
it, you know, to lose weight, sounds to me like a lot more fun than eating salad.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I like that. I like that. So, Tom, as you may know, my Midlife Fulfilled podcast is really based on seeking and finding fulfillment across what I call the five pillars. And the five pillars are health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. And so I'd like to ask you, what do you think this experience has been across those five pillars? Meaning, which of those five pillars do you think it touched the most? So again, health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy.
Wow. If you put a gun to my head, I don't know which one I would say.
Well, I won't put a gun to your head. I promise you that.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely impacted all of it, right? We talked about the health and fitness, right? That goes without saying. Relationships, to me, relationships are the ultimate currency, right? The relationships, the people that I met out there, how it helped my relationships with my wife, and my family. I would say that's going to have a meaningful one. Professionally, and my career, boy, it gave me, I would say, another 15 years on my career, right? Because if I can come back like this, I don't have to retire, right? Just let me go away and do something like this every now and then. And also with the team, right? Man, I have got the greatest team. They stepped up. They made me proud, right? At times I thought I got to get back so I get a job, right? If not, they're going to just say, we don't need you anymore. So on the career there, I think that was very powerful. And then finally, the legacy. Um, we got so many great pictures from the Camino. And when we got back, we ended up going to a funeral. And you know how when people at funerals, they put the pictures up and everything like that. Karen and I mentioned at our funeral, decades and decades from now, we hope there's a lot of pictures of the Camino, right? Because that was a memorable time. I can't say there's going to be pictures of me at work, right? Closing the deal, having a record week, all the rest of that. But it's going to be the memories there. And I think there's also the legacy of what it's going to do for our family because Karen and I loved Spain so much that we came back and we told the kids, you know, you're the only reason we came back. If not, I'd be working remotely from there. Um, and they're like, well, why don't you? Right? You go there sometime, not all the time, but we'll come visit you. And so, whereas it used to be, we would talk about, wow, how can we get down to Florida for a couple of weeks in the winter? Now we're looking and going, with the cost of living, how can we just go to Spain for a couple of months and rent a 2-bedroom place and invite friends and family to come visit us at a week at a time? I think that's going to be a legacy thing too.
So it has touched each of the five pillars. I love that. That is really terrific. I don't think I've heard that before about one experience. So I'll ask you for a closing thought, Tom, as you reflect on this conversation, the impact that the Camino has had on you and your relationships, really across all five pillars. What's a closing thought that you'd like to share?
Um, I don't want to tell everybody they should do it, but I do want to tell them you can do it, right? And on so many different ways. The oldest person to ever complete the Camino that we did, I want to say is 94 years old, right? And
Mhm.
people would say, how did you train for that? I've been training for it for what, 58 years walking, right? That's all it is. Some people would do it very, very slowly, right? The young people could do it a lot faster, right? It's just walking. So from that standpoint, you can do it. The other thing is that there's the financial thing, right? How can you go to Europe for a month, right? The cost of living, especially on the Camino, was so affordable, right? If you want to stay in one of the boarding houses at night, it's $13 or euros, so about $15 a night. And meals, you probably budget another $20 a day for that. So it's very inexpensive. We recently went to a Hampton Inn and Suites off the Turnpike, and I told my wife, "This is the most expensive hotel that we have stayed in the last 2 months." Right? It was like $110. We never
And that was
spent that a
you're
night.
talking in the US.
This was in the US, right?
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So even the real nice hotels there, you can afford it. And then the other thing is just, I always told myself, well, I can't afford to take 30 days off, right? Oh, the world would come to an end. My family would, my business would, all the rest of that. Well, you know what? If I drop dead, the world would go on without me. If I had a heart attack, I would have had to take more than 30 days off. And a friend of mine helped me about a month before I left. I was so stressed out on it. And I'm like, well, what if something happens? And he's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I'm like, well, something at business happens. And he's like, well, what would you do if you were at home? I said, I'd get on the phone and talk to the client or whatever. And he's like, you can do that from the Camino. And I'm like, but family, what if one of my family members, got sick, got hurt? And he's like, they've got these things called airplanes and American Express cards, right? You could be home at their bedside, in probably under 24 hours. So I just looked at that and it's like, I told myself all of these reasons that I couldn't do it. Maybe you're saying the same thing. I can't do it. You decide whether or not you should, but I can tell you, you can.
That's fantastic. And it sounds to me, while nobody can guarantee it, it sounds to me like for a lot of people, it can be life changing for their own individual reasons. And of course, I think your story is a good testament to that, Tom. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here today on a Vulnerable Conversations episode here on the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast. If someone wants to follow up and, just connect with you, what's a good way for someone to connect with you?
I was going to say, you can either go to interviewvalet.com, which is my company, or I'm most active on LinkedIn. I'm the only Tom Schwab in all of Kalamazoo. So, if you have any questions, if you'd like to connect, please reach out to me.
And for my international listeners, where is Kalamazoo?
Kalamazoo is halfway between Chicago and Detroit, right? It's about 2 hours from each. It actually does exist.
You're talking Michigan, right?
I'm sorry, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Great. Fantastic. Well, Tom, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Bernie.